Hello and welcome to this Propellerheads Reason Synthesizer programming tutorial. I'm your host, Marcus Unlimited. Glad to have you here. So before we begin, let's start with that first step that I hope is becoming a habit in the thoughts of any budding or developing synthesizer programmers, is that whatever our default patch that comes up in, mine currently comes up with the bass guitar, which is a great patch. However, we're looking to go to some wild new territory here, and that means that we are going to reset the device, and that may not be showing up on the tutorial screen. So I want to tell you what just happened there is I just right-clicked in the center here, and we get a second screen that comes up, and in that listing, we want to choose Reset Device. Now you'll notice it has returned us to this standard, that same kind of default sound we always hear. The great thing about this is this lets us know right where home base is, right where everything that we need to work with is beginning from, and what needs to be pulled back to zero. And I kind of wish the default thing was just a pull back to zero on everything, but let's work within reality. We get a lot further. Okay, so previously we've worked with it says wave 0, but it's actually the first waveform that we get to work with, which is the sawtooth. We've also done a tutorial on the square wave, and we've also done a triangle wave tutorial. And we've approached the tutorials as going into some of the strongest properties of the particular waveform and expanding upon that, which is a great place to begin. So now we are looking at what, on first appearance and listening, seems to be the simplest of waveforms, and that's just simply the sine wave. So for any of you who are Audacity users, you're very familiar with this sound, because that's the A440 that will be generally shot out when we try to make a sine wave in Audacity. Sine wave is a great classic waveform that you can do a million things with, and it's funny, it's the simplest, but in a way, because of that simplicity, it lends itself to working with very complex ideas. I believe they say the Mayans found the number 0 for us, and it's funny, once we found the simplest number, all kinds of new things were possible with that. So let's take a look at what we can do with this. We have our sine wave, and one of my first thoughts is the idea that the entire DX7, the famous FM synthesizer from Yamaha, was actually built with nothing but sine waves, and then it was entirely about how the frequency modulation interacted with said sine waves. So if I go to our frequency modulation here, we notice nothing happens because we don't have an additional oscillator brought in to modulate the other one. One of them has to work as kind of, a carrier, and the other one has to work as kind of, a modulator. So the other thing that we like to do is to prevent surprises from all these overlapping waves. We want to take our second one to the exact same type, and that's going to let us know again from where we're starting from. This doesn't mean we're not going to look into mixing other waveforms at another time, but you can do so much from here, and it's kind of smarter to work this way, even all the way through building your patches, because you know what's creating everything, like any little artifact or element that comes up in the resultant sound. So now I'm kind of thinking, should we go for a DX7 bass sound? Pretty predictable, and they have quite a few of those in there. And we want to show you like some surprising stuff. So I start thinking about FM synthesis and some of the more amazing things that have happened with it. And one of it is a lot of the work that Brian Eno did. He had this great sound where it got into this really, really upper sanctum of sounds, and God forbid you put a little reverb on it, you really have something. But we're actually, remember, our goal is to get such a raw sound that's amazing that if you do touch it with reverb later, it's just going to take it exponentially to a greater place, instead of building from kind of, if we start with a big reverb, or we take, as I mentioned before, we take the resonant filter and crank it through the roof right off the bat, that's almost like building a car from the frame out, and then at the last minute thinking about the central engine. So let's work on the engine of our sound here. Kind of like the volume. Let's see if we can give it a little touch there. Okay, so what we're going to do is I want a synth pad that graduates up into a higher octave, maybe even a couple octaves higher. So I think what I'm going to do here is let's bring in our second wave, like how this happens here. Now, we notice we have two waves happening, and we have this, our filter envelope. I don't want anything velocity-wise to give me any surprises yet. Let's come back and add this in after we have the main body of our sound developed, okay? So I mentioned that we were going for a pad, and a pad is kind of a, it's kind of the fancy modern way of talking about what happens with a chordal sound that would have been desirable on say, a gentle Baroque organ played in a hall, or when a large string section, and we're going way past. We're not interested in copying those instruments. Those instruments are great as they are, and synthesizers, I totally agree with Robert Moog. Synthesizers about going to new places that you have not heard before. So I added, there we go, I added a little bit of a release to the tail end of that, and however, I'd love that lovely shimmering thing, I believe, to come in. I either want that to come in later, or it's going to come in first and the lower octave is going to come in later. So I think the first thing that we want to do is, let's see if we can go to, we don't want it to, even though the affectations we're talking about there are relative to the first and second oscillator, what's really happening is we like this happening as it is, just a simple sine wave for now, before we bring in some FM. And instead, we're going to go to the mix because we want it to go from one oscillator to the second. So, and of course it's doing nothing at first because we don't have our amount of influence chosen yet. And I think since we mentioned a pad, let's back off the release here. And for those of you who are seasoned pros with synthesizers, these particular tutorials, you might pick up some surprises from me, but I'm really designing this for ideally a generation who has this sort of capability. But back in the day, like when I was a young kid and kind of like a interesting prodigy synth programmer at the same time, we really learned how to do some things with synths because you just didn't have the press a button and you have these giant samples, and a lot of the sounds that people kind of blow people's minds in tracks are still good old great synthesizer programming. Kind of funny to call it good old now. It's pretty funny. Okay, so we're getting more of a pad effect now, but I think I want there we go. So now we're starting, and this, if we have it set this way, and we hear the lower octave coming in, I like that. And one thing I like is without having to play with too many features, if we go, well, wait a second, what would happen if the exact opposite was modulated, of the mix was modulated through this envelope? Well, we just click invert here, and now we have the low slowly going into the high. I kind of think, I kind of like that when it's a little closer to a standard idea that someone might use. About a sine wave, you almost have to be careful with it, but the lows are really fantastic because it's so clean. It's such a clean, straightforward sound. So you'll notice that as I release the key, we have this sudden urgency of the sound returning to a basically both octaves at once, and that's because the modulation envelope does not have a release. Our overall completed sound does have a release. That's where we're getting this nice tail end on it, but that little interruption there, I'm not sure I like that. I actually like the idea of maybe a little bit of that. So let's take it up to its famous middle there. Direct middle is about 64, but there we go. We get something far less as we depart from it. Just kind of moving around different sanctions of the circle of fifth there. So I think let's see if we can make this a little bit more. This is a really great thing. You can have a lot of activity on the track on, say, the low end of the Syn. So you could have all this stuff happening down there, and then up here you just have your something really nice and light in the background. And remember, just to give you an idea of that, let me pull this way back for a second. These type of sounds lend themselves to being very surprising how far back we got this. So let's take it. Where's that? About somewhere up there, about 80 or something. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I think I want something needs to happen later in the sound, I feel. However, let's see if we can do something. A little frequency modulation to come in, because when you're working with FM, that is just totally the ticket. In fact, we might bring, let's go ahead and bring this back in now that we know what we're dealing with. I'm going to play it a little bit harder, and we're getting a few different properties now. But let's really have the FM happen. So here's me gently playing it, and here's me really bringing some velocity in. Way too much. But it's pretty cool how we literally have two worlds of sounds there. Remember, these dials, especially with FM, subtlety for the win, and you're probably picking that up by now, just because you can go to 127. As I listened to this, I came up with an idea. Let's say, as I'm listening to this, I go, you know what? I basically want the FM instead. That's me playing with a very low velocity, very gently there. And I love, we were going for a sine wave orientated patch that travels through a couple octaves, and we have that. However, what I would like to do instead is I want that same idea, but I don't want to lose. You see how now we're getting a little bit more of a flutish, glassy flute type sound? I want that to show up a lot less. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to reverse these ideas, and I'm going to have the velocity actually reduce the general FM. So here's our mainstay FM. So this means if I really whack on the particular velocity, now we're going to get, okay, so now we have, so this is our standard. Now we have, what's happening now is we're getting our glossy flute right at the onset, but when we want to bring in our true sine wave, I'm playing a little bit harder now. Let's actually, let's back this off just a little bit. Really want the minimum of that, but I want to make sure that we can get at some. Oh, and one thing I wanted to bring up is be sure not to assess my abilities as a musician, even though I don't claim to be, say, particularly a pianist. Definitely have a pretty big resume as a vocalist. Actually, between me and my students, a pretty big award-winning voice instructor. Actually, I guess when I add up all the scholarships and everything they've gotten and all that, as well as which is great. I don't say that in any sort of like. Yeah, I just don't want to distract with that on this. And also, too, the thing that I'm trying to get to is this is a synthesizer programming lab, and all of these are. So when you see something up there, programming synthesizers, that's my main focus. So if you hear some kind of little flubs here and there on the keyboard, don't assess my abilities by that or anything like that. This is Aristotle called it the non sequitur. So thank God we have that to reach out for. So this is basically a wrong type of test for what we're doing here. This is all about synthesizer programming. And in fact this would sound lovely with really you have like a nice light soprano up there doing some thing up there. Nice. Okay. Dancing around the circle of fifths there. So now I think we definitely need something happening in the latter part of the sound. I wonder how much, since this is about, I really want to demonstrate how the simple sine wave really lends itself to cool things with frequency modulation, because the sine wave is simple. FM synthesis is complex, and the two make a really nice kind of marriage of thoughts there. Let's take this, and I'm going to go to our rounded random, so to say. So in case anyone who doesn't have the subtractor who's watching this, let me explain what happens here. These basically, sound-wise, the modulation of the low-frequency oscillator, this first one, will basically interact in a very, as we see this rigid square shape, you'll hear its immediate highs and lows. You hear it's kind of pounding out a beat, so to say, and that's a great thing for. Pretty wicked on those lows there. However, let's stay on track with our actual goal. So we're going for a pad, so we want something gentle and light, and so you see I went from the rigid square shape of the LFO, and you notice how this is a perfectly even triangle shape, perfectly even sawtooth, reversed sawtooth forward, and okay, what's going to happen is these are predictable. So this is going to give us a wow, that sort of thing, and this is going to give us a ramp up and a sudden drop off, just like it looks like. This is going to give us an immediate ramp and then a drop off. Here it's kind of the opposite of this. This is going to give us a coarse yes no, like a binary idea. You can do some cool stuff with that too. And this, of course, is the one we just did earlier. And you see how the picture there is uneven, like peaks and valleys, like this one is higher and lower. It's letting you know that it's really going to go in there and grab in the code the RND or random function. I did a little programming back in the day too, so that's a cool thing you can do, is you can bring some life to synthesizers and things like that by using these little I forget how the inner engine of synthesizers and computers do this, but they reach out for something like, I don't know, like the clock or something, which is, or the date or something, and run it by some sort of, multiply it by pi or something like that. And so if you reach out for that little command, random, and this is behind the scenes here, and I'm sure the guys who made this amazing thing, they could tell you for days how this actually works, but it's going in there and actually grabbing numbers in a random fashion, and I guess you could also build an array. You could have an array of like, I don't know, like 20, 56, 14, you put them in like a parentheses, but that's more in the programming things, but that's, that's what's happening behind the scenes. I just think that's cool because in the end we end up getting a really nice. I like how it's. I wanted something that sounded like a little bit like it's playing with the sound. So probably about. Let's go for quarter notes. So it's like moving, that sort of thing like that. And I currently have our sequencer tempo is set at 120. So the sync there is syncing to 120, which I pretty much almost always use this. The reason it's a cool idea to use this, if you're not familiar with what's happening, is if you do this, it just runs free, and your rate is functioning in a, say, slow to fast ratio. This locks the background of your rate right into the tempo. So I see down here on my sequencer clock, I have it off screen so you can see a nice big zoom of this right now. But down below on my sequencer clock, we have 120 BPMs at 4/4. So every one of those little random bumps is happening directly on a quarter note, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and then back on it. Okay, so there we go. So sounds like a toy up here, you know what I mean? Like R2D2's going nuts with some robotic guitars or something. That's cool, and there's a time for that and everything like that. But we're really going for like a beautiful. Okay, now you hear it sounds like we're kind of like in a cave of crystals or something now. I really like this sort of thing. And oh, I tell you, this sound, I think I'm going to do this in this tour just so you hear what I mean by the benefits of working on the body of the sound first. Those little subtle LFO modulations of the frequency modulation, what's happening is frequency modulation is taking this sine wave and basically modulating the other with it. And right now, I just want to leave this on. I don't want the phase offset to be multiplied or subtracted, because then we're going to start getting into what is for right now. And there's some unbelievably cool stuff you can do with this. But right now, I want you to hear what you can do by having a directive and staying pretty focused on this before we get into the kind of the amount of numerical addition to concepts that happens when you start playing with these. It gets out there, and let's hold off on that for now. So even with the phase offset set at 0, just some basic F-hen, we hear a really beautiful sound. I think let's see how subtle we can. There we go. Really subtle, because when we put this in to the RV 7000s, like the film score, or they have a the Metropolitan Opera one is actually, I like to use that on my vocals. They actually did a reverb model of the Metro. It's really cool, and I can tell this one on the film score patch in the RV 7000 is going to be pretty freaking awesome. Okay, so now since we're going for a pad, which means we want some gentle highs, let's not use the low pass 24. I would use that if we were going for a bass. In fact, we might even. That's the band pass filter. High passes. Let's go for the band pass, because it's gonna there. It allows more of the interesting high mids in our artifacts. You hear those little kind of intentional LFO artifacts we got in there now. So the patch is really alive now. Wasn't really interested in lows with this patch too much. I was purely looking for like a, Okay, cool. So So we have basically what we set out to do. We have a little bit of life. We have the FM synthesis working beautifully with the sine waves to give us a little bit of life to the patch. We went a different direction with this. We raised our main FM to have it generally backed off to get more towards our original sine wave sound. The harder we play, or with increased velocity. That way the rarer incredibly softly played. So I'm playing super soft now, and it's bringing out more of the sound that we only want to happen occasionally. So instead, and that works really well because we want that beautiful sine wavy high pitch sound. In fact, just to let someone know, I'm going to take this up, both of these up one more octave, so that as soon as you lay your hands on the center of the keyboard, you already know that this patch is headed in the direction of being a pad. Because the lows on this is not designed for, it. You could do some interesting things with that. And now that I've raised those 2 octaves, the lows are pretty. It brings out almost a wooden aspect down there on the bottom. Let's see what happens when we have a high. I love what the bandpass did with that. It added a little bit of sand. Sands through the hourglass. So very cool. And now, hold on, this is okay. When you hit those little LFO artifacts, let me tell you why I was so subtle with the amounts that I brought them in with. We are going to add, I'm going to the, I'm right-clicking now, and this is bringing up a second window that's not on screen, but I'm going right-click, and I'm scrolling down to Effects, and I'm scrolling down to the RV7000, which in this version is at Mark II. Okay, so if we were going direct in the mixing board, we would approach this differently, but I just want this to be so clear and easy to see. Let me make sure that came up in a way good that you can see that. Okay. So now we've added our reverb, and we notice we have a completely wet signal. That means the thing's just going to be drenched in reverb. And that's a pretty common patch there, but that's not what I'm looking for. We're looking for the, let's see if we have it here. Doing a little search. There we go. Okay, so I'm dragging the Film Score RV7 patch from the patch browser into here. And now, let's see what we got. So man, we are really in that cave of crystals now. I absolutely love it. So, and remember, I like doing entire environments like this, but with a lot of the music's out there, imagine other things happening, and this is set far back in the background. We're not even getting into panning yet, and that's a whole nother cool thing there. So, let's check out those super highs. I think probably like a Juice 8. This chord is a beautiful chord. I love this. This is a G major 7, but with a suspended second, not a suspended fourth. But so here's a standard G major 7, and I'm spreading that out over 2 octaves. But listen what happens when we take the third and drop it to the second. Kind of get this beautiful thing, and it actually sounds really good in the same octave. I think I want to have the, I'm going to make one last adjustment here. I want our keyboard tracking of the filter to be pretty much perfectly even throughout. So let's reduce this a little bit so that we have. And then just in case you're wondering what's happening with the voicing there, is I'm using what I usually when I'm doing my own little scores, I'll put a little asterisk and the letters OS, not for operating system. Very logical, different idea there in today's world. But OS means orchestral split. So that means I'll have a series of chords. If I was playing the chords directly in one octave, we get something like that, which leans more to the performance of an organ. That's totally cool. That was a big mistake that used to happen in like the 80s. For some reason, you'd have folks with like minimal minimal knowledge of arrangement, and they'd say voice everything like it's a string section, which that would be the OS thing, the orchestral split, and that's what the OS for me stands for. I'm just giving you that as a helpful time saving tip, and so that means you could have like this huge lead sheet, and you're in the studio and you're going through your set of chords, and you have something like this. So you go from this. This is straight with no orchestral split. Here's a C major, and then we're going to a G major. I'm just gonna do the circle of fifths for a little bit. And that's the great thing about synthesizers. If you create an entirely new sound, and you can approach this as from an organ voicing perspective or more of a strings voicing perspective. Now that was that was straightforward, all the notes sounding in one octave. Now I'm going to split that up by taking the low and the high on the chord, because this is very relative to synthesizer programming. Sometimes you have a gem of a sound, like for instance, we listen to this. I'm going to play the. So we hear how there's a beauty in one note there. Now, as we change to the chord, some of that beauty is a little bit masked, because even though they're on different notes, there is a little bit of the phasing of the artifacts, so to say. Those little electronic chiffs and tinkles and everything that were happening because of how we applied the LFO. But when we use the orchestral voicing, I'm going to take the same chord, and I'm going to. This is actually this too shows you how to bring more life out of all of your synths, whether it's the subtractor or something else. And of course, I'm getting really excited and musically nerdy, so I starting to stutter and everything. Calm down. Okay, so let's go back into the circle of fifths now. But now we are going to use the orchestral split, sometimes abbreviated by asterisk OS in my own scores. Okay, so here we go. So much beauty in the circle of fifths. I love the circle of fifths. I love it. So basically what I did there is I just did a complete tour of the circle of fifths, but I was using the orchestral split voicing, which not only with this patch that we created here, but think about that in your own patchwork. Even if you're just pulling in factory patches, some of which are spectacular. Some of the factory patches are really great. Check out the effects bank. There's really every once in a while I'll just grab one of those. It just as it is. It's really cool. So, anyways, had quite a few things happen in this tutorial. Pretty lengthy, I know. We saw how the simple sine wave lends itself to complex interactions with the FM, frequency modulation synthesis, created at Stanford University. So the subtractor may have been beautifully programmed by the folks up there in Sweden doing our beautiful program here. That's where Propellerheads is located. But actual FM synthesis is known for having its birth at Stanford University, I think immediately of Dr. Chowning and Dr. Max Matthews, I believe. Anyways, those are some cool names you can research and find out more on. I used C Sound for a little programming language, and I remember they were a major. They were always involved in discussions on that. So, as you can see, this is one of my favorite things to do, and I want you to have this power too, because I just as a listener, I love when people are using it. Remember, we didn't just program a patch with today's technology. We brought that patch to additional life using some old school J.S. Bach, J.S. Bach knowledge of the circle of fifths, you know what I mean? Like going all the way back to Vivaldi, So there again, it's a C major chord, but instead of just blocking it out like an organ there, which is cool, and there are times to do that. Listen to how much now. In fact, let's see if I can get. Let me do like a really like a further voice. Let me do some inversions. So now I'm taking some simple chords, and I'm getting the furthest hand stretch inversions I can get. And listen to how all of the minute LFO interactions with the frequency modulation just let you know they love that widespread voicing. Now you're hearing all those little shining crystals in the cavern, so to say. You're hearing them really do their thing there for you, spread out amongst the keyboards. So now, unto another mountain of other responsibilities. Tearing up, man, tearing up. But I love some of them too. They're great too. It's all good. It's all good. So we hope you've enjoyed this synthesizer patch programming tutorial spotlighting FM synthesis and the sine wave. A special shout out there to Dr. Chowning and Max Matthews, Stanford University, Sweden, America, California, world, galaxy, universe. I'm just going to keep going. Jupiter 8, made by Roland. Okay, so anyways, having some fun with it there. Actually, in this, I should be talking about a TX81Z by Yamaha run through a reverb, because I used to get some very similar patches to this with that cool little unit back in the day. So, fun. Awesome. So this concludes our mini series on the first 4 waveforms. I don't like to talk too much about the future, but man, I'll tell you what, you can just go into worlds on these others, man. You know, and that's one of those things I like to do. So I have no idea how many hours I've logged programming synthesizers throughout my life, but it's an awesome thing, man. Why don't we spend our time doing only this instead of building bombs and junk, you know? Okay, so have a wonderful day. We'll see you on the next one, and help me get those subscribers up. Help me get, like those vids, but help me get those subscribers up so I can really start spending more time. And I got a cool new system here that's working, but I'm looking to do some like larger productions with tutorials, but I need your help to get there.